Thank you. Thank you. Everybody hear me? Let's go back to square one. Somehow this got started on its own, had a mind of its own. I really appreciate all of you coming out, and this is the kind of talk that is for everybody. It's aimed at children, and it's aimed at veterans, and it's aimed at people who don't know that much about space but want to find out about it. So let's begin. It's a personal story, and I think if you follow the personal story, you'll see some of your own life in it. So I like to start it with this quote from Wernher von Braun. Impossible is a word I have learned to use with the utmost of caution. Think about that. So in my case, I just feel amazingly lucky. There were 400,000 people who worked on Project Apollo. There were well over 3 billion people watching Apollo 11 on TV. And of all of that, there were only a handful of people in mission control, and I just happened to be one of them. So I like to think that all the education and the hard work and the genes and all that stuff really was the reason for it. But I have to tell you, as you'll find out, luck had a lot to do with it. And so I want you to pay careful attention to what I'm about to say, because this can really happen to you, and you can make something impossible become real. So let's start at the beginning. And the beginning is about dreams. We all have dreams. And NASA has a credo that we've used. It says, let your reach exceed your grasp. You know what that means? That means if you think you can reach here, go beyond it. That's what it means. So, you know, finding your dream is easier said than done. All of us are looking for our dreams. It's easier said than done. But over the years, I've managed to put together a roadmap, and we're going to talk about that roadmap as we get towards the end of the talk. And it's called the 4 Ps. And the 4 Ps stand for passion, priority, perseverance, and pudding. So just register that for a while, and we'll come back to it. So my passion was to explore. And I kind of started that 6 hours before I was born. That's a photo of my mother bending over, and I'm saying, get me out of here. I'm ready to go, right? This passion ran into trouble very early. In the 3rd grade, my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Steckler, was very displeased with my report card. My behavior was really abysmal. My grades weren't that good. And she picked me up one day and she put me at the back of the class and put a dunce cap on me and pointed at me and said, the only thing you will ever be good for is taking up space. And you know, I took that on board. Hey. And the next problem I had, believe it or not, I thought about that, well, I'd like to get involved, but my family, you know, my father, we were struggling. My father had a factory in New York. He had a belt and button business for ladies' dresses. Anybody that's familiar with New York and the fashion business knows this area is called the schmata business. And schmata in Yiddish means rags, but they extended it to dresses. So one day, this dress comes out, this dress right here, and it's called a chemise. And the chemise came from Paris, and it had this strange characteristic. Its other name was the sack dress, and it had no belts, and it had no buttons. And my father's business went like that. And he came to me one day and he said, whatever you do, wherever you go, do not get involved with schmatas. So I listened to that, right? And then years later, NASA was spinning up Project Apollo, and they were hiring so many people. So I applied, and lo and behold, I got my dream job. And I go to show up to find out what I'm going to do, and what do I find out I'm doing? Schmatas. The biggest schmata, the most complicated schmata in the world. And I'm looking and saying, oh my God. So the first thought, what would my father think? And the second thought is, you know, this is really complicated. I need to find out about this. This is really complicated. I'm right from school, wet behind the ears. I better learn fast. So the first thing I learned is without a spacesuit, you have serious problems. So this is what we call executing the Marshmallow Man. You've got about 11 seconds without a spacesuit. and your mucous membranes break, all of your fluids come boiling out through your nose and your ear. You expand, and basically this is what happens to you. People have wondered what you look like without a spacesuit. This is what you would sort of look like. You just pop. Okay. So the next thing, okay, you can stop. The next thing, a lesson I learned was, without a good spacesuit, you're not going to go very far. So you can have a spacesuit that's really a tank, and you're just sitting there like that, going nowhere. Or you could have a spacesuit like Woody Allen designed, and you can see what that thing looked like up there. That's kind of a comic spacesuit. Or you could have a spacesuit that is so heavy that the only way you can really use it is to attach a tether to a rover and offload all the weight onto the rover. So those are the kinds of spacesuits you could have. Obviously, weight plays a role. Now, the other thing that plays a role, lesson 3, I learned, you have to know where you are and how fast you can move. This is crucial. So why is it crucial? Spacesuits come with 2 life support systems. One is called the primary, and it's good between 7 and 8 hours. And the other is called the backup or the emergency, and it's good for 30 minutes. Now, if you were designing a mission and you wanted to know how far you could walk from your safe haven, your base, and still be safe, the way you do that is you pick the emergency one. You say, oh, I'm going to start walking. My primary system's going to fail, so I'm only going to have 30 minutes. You have to think like that. And you have to even think more than that. You have to say, well, that means I can only go out 15 minutes and turn around and come back 15 minutes. So why is this important? It's important because if the fastest if the fastest speed you can walk in a spacesuit is 6 kilometers an hour, the furthest you can go is 3 kilometers, and the furthest you can go out and back is only 1.5 kilometers. But if you're smart and you design a better spacesuit, and you can walk on the spacesuit at 10 kilometers an hour, then you can go out for 5 and 2.5 out and 2.5 back. You've almost doubled how far you can go. So why is this important? It's important because you're spending millions of dollars, in some cases billions, to go to a place, and the name of the game is exploration, to explore. So if you can get 30 or 40% more exploration in a day because you've designed a better spacesuit, that's really important. The public is getting their money, NASA's doing their job, but you see how important spacesuits can become. So the next lesson, the obvious lesson, is whatever you do, do not run out of life support. You need to know how much you have left. So a spacesuit is complicated. It's got all of these fans and pumps and heat exchangers and batteries, and it's whirling around. And you need to know how fast you're using up that life support. But there's a way to look at it, not so complicated. You look at it like a car. It's like an automobile analogy. So what that means is, in a car, if you push your foot down to the floor, you use up gas faster, and your mileage goes down. In a spacesuit, if you work harder, your mileage goes down. You use up life support faster. So you have to watch how much energy you're putting into the spacesuit. And so one thing we do is we work out this profile here with a red, yellow, and green line. And the red line is kind of a predicted energy expenditure. So before you ever go out to a place, all the engineers and computers predict how hard you're going to work, and that's the red line. Now, if it and you see the red line, I don't know if you can see, it comes down at about 6.6 hours before it runs out of consumables. That's not as important as the fact that if you actually work harder than that, and you're on the yellow line, it comes down at 5.2 hours. You've lost over an hour because you've been working too hard. But if you're really cool, and the terrain is smooth, and your spacesuit is really well designed, guess what? You work less hard to do the same tasks, and then you can go out all the way to almost 9 hours. So not only is the suit important, but you are important. and your conditioning is important, and the terrain is important. All of that affects how much time you've got. And you need to know how much time you've got. You do not want to run out of life support. Okay, lesson 5. This is a lesson we learned back in the Gemini days. Working in an air-cooled spacesuit can be really bad for you. Just imagine you're in a closet that's got high humidity and you start doing jumping jacks and there's no circulation. You begin to have an idea of what an air-cooled spacesuit feels like. The temperatures continue to rise inside the spacesuit the more you work. And it's almost like being in a sauna with your clothes on. It's really bad. You can be blinded by your own sweat and you can get into hypothermia. And we discovered all of that in the Gemini program. And it's a good thing we did, because had we not, we never would have made it through Apollo. So there was an answer to that. And the answer came from England, from a RAF pilot who had designed something called a liquid-cooled garment. So a liquid-cooled garment, it kind of looks like these pictures. What it does, and Gene Cernan referred to it last night, it's like a set of underwear that's got tubes stitched into it. And these tubes circulate cold water. And the water has a little valve, and it all goes through your backpack. And you can basically turn that valve, and the hotter you get, you can select cold water. And the warmer you get, you can select cold water. And you can basically control your own temperature. And you find out something very interesting when you do that. You can work much harder, your endurance goes up, your ability to do hard work goes up, all these things happen. And the funniest thing is, it's like being in a cold shower and not getting wet. So the worst case is being in a sauna with your clothes on, and the best case is being in a shower and not getting wet. So it's an amazing device. But the other thing about it that I discovered when I was finding out about it is it can also be used to measure metabolic rate. And metabolic rate, as we've just seen, is really important for how fast you use your energy. So I'm going to show you one of my proudest possessions. It hangs in my closet in my room, and that is Buzz Aldrin's liquid-cooled garment, his Apollo 11 training garment. And it's a little worn with time, and I'm not giving it back to Buzz. I'm not selling it at Sotheby's quite yet, but it's got all these badges and cool things on it. And one look at it and getting involved in it, it got me turned on. So when you talk about dreams, they go into strange places. And so this is all the things that are going on when I first got to NASA. Now, I got to NASA in mid-1967. Apollo isn't very long. And now it's mid-1968, early 1968. I don't know much about Apollo, but I'm starting to get really, really interested in liquid-cooled garments. I'm studying liquid-cooled garments, and I'm studying temperature control in the human body. Because if you're going to use a liquid-cooled garment on the human body, you really have to understand what it does to the human body. So I started doing that. And the first job that I got was designing a computer model of this. So that was my task. And I started off with a very simple equation, which is how I got into this whole talk about a simple equation can affect your life. And that simple equation is known as the energy equation, also known as the first law of thermodynamics. And basically it says you put heat in, you take heat out, and the difference between the two is how hot you get or how cool you get. That's a way of saying it. So in order to computerize this, I made a very simple model. I took a sphere and said that sphere was the human body, and I put a heat source, modeled a heat source in it, and that heat source was metabolic rate, and then I put another sphere around it, and that was the way to get rid of the heat. So this was a very simple, what we called a two-node mathematical model of the human body in a spacesuit. And of course it was really, really crude, and my boss said to me, well, can you do better than that? And so I started really pushing and working evenings and working nights because I was excited about this. And I added more nodes, and I went and got it from 2 to 8 to 16, and then finally 41. And then I added a thermoregulatory system model with blood flow and sweating and shivering. I was reading all about this stuff. I was so into it. And then I added a liquid-cooled garment and finally a spacesuit over all of that, and began to get more and more complicated. And so what are some of the things this model could do? It could mathematically predict the temperatures of a spacesuit, the temperatures of your body, the life support usage of a spacesuit, the life support remaining, and the comfort of an astronaut. Now, this is all pretty important, cool stuff, but you have to understand, I'm sitting in a vacuum building this model. I don't know where or how it relates to anything. And the next thing I knew, unbeknownst to me, completely unbeknownst to me, another world came and collided with me. And that was the world of mission control. Now, mission control had a responsibility. And that responsibility was to ensure astronauts' safety and comfort, and also monitor life support consumables to make sure they don't run out of them, and determine metabolic rate. And in order to do that, they were writing algorithms, what we call algorithms, equations, to determine this. And I found out about that. I don't know who told me about it, but one day I said to myself, hey, isn't that what 41 Node Man is doing? I said, yeah, that's what it's doing. So we went to mission control and said, we have this algorithm. And they said, well, that's okay, we have our own, because the branches and the lines of responsibility are very strictly divided at NASA. I was coming from engineering, mission control was part of operations. The two never meet. But in this particular case, somehow along the line they said, well, maybe we'll take a look at it. And so it became that we decided to do a test, a contest. And in that contest, we were going to play off all the algorithms that would predict how fast life support was being used in a spacesuit. And so to do that, we did it in a place called Cecil. Now, Cecil stands for Space Environment Simulation Laboratory. So you see a picture of Cecil over here. And I don't know if I can get a pointer. It might help me a little bit. Somebody has a pointer, because my pointer stopped. But you take a look at Cecil, and at the very bottom there is a person. Right here is a person. You get an idea of the size of Cecil, right? That is a spacecraft. That's how big Cecil is. Cecil has the biggest O-ring on the biggest door on the biggest thermal vacuum chamber in the world by far. And what we were going to do was put astronauts in there wearing spacesuits, and we're going to have them work and see how fast they ran out of life support. We were going to stop at a certain time, and we're going to measure how much life support they had left, and then we were going to look at all the algorithms that were going to predict this and see which one came closer. And so to give you a notion of what this involves, you have a big test set up with treadmills and all this motion capture device, and you have information that you have to capture. And here you see astronauts actually descending into the manlock and into the airlock and into the Space Environment Simulation Chamber. Here you get a pretty good shot at how much wiring was attached, so we could understand all of these things. And then we put them in, we closed the door, we sucked all the air out, we put an artificial sun up that was similar to what you'd experience on the moon, and we said, go, start working in their spacesuits. And they started to work, and we looked at all the data that came back. And here you see some of the data. This is real-time metabolic rate. And this is cumulative metabolic rate, how much energy they were using. And this is body heat storage, a measure of their condition. And this is sweat rate. And we did a lot of stuff like this. All these information was coming out. This is really the important one. How much consumables are left, how much life support is left versus time. So we looked at all of these things. And at the end of this test was Judgment Day. And lo and behold, and again, I have to say, I think luck played a role in this. I don't even know how all this works in life, but I know that the 4 Ps are instrumental, and we'll get to that. All of a sudden, 41 Node Man wins the contest. And I'm automatically designated as a member of something called the Metabolic Assessment Team. And the Metabolic Assessment Team was going to be at the Mission Control Center. And when I heard that, I just jumped up and down and screamed, yeah, what the hell, man? I can't believe this has happened. It's just a freak set of events. But there's a caveat to that, which is none of that really matters unless somebody's walking on the moon, because this is coming from their spacesuits. So Apollo 11 has to get to the moon, has to land on the moon, and they have to be able to get down the ladder and start working. And on top of that, all the data has to come back. It's a pretty tall order. So that was just first base. One more thing I didn't add when you're walking on the surface in the moon in craters and rills and terrain, you get into places that are like bowl-shaped. You've heard the expression, it's always hotter in the football field than it is outside, because the sun's rays come in, they bounce around, and it's really hotter, a lot hotter. And you have to know how much hotter it is, because that heat is using up life support the same way metabolic rate does. It can get into the suit, and the suit can't tell the difference between that heat and you. So in order to understand that, we made these three-dimensional plastic relief maps of the terrain that the astronaut's going to walk through. And on the left, you can probably see, I don't know if you can see it, you can see the EVA tracings. And so we would use those maps to predict every step that they would take, how much heat would be coming in. And we used elaborate mathematical models, much more detailed than 41-node man to do that. But that was the last step before we actually were able to start the ball rolling. So of course, when all this had happened and all is ready, Apollo 11 launches. Now, if you've gone from me, which was being a schlepper whose father was making belts and buttons in Manhattan, to all of a sudden being part of Apollo 11 on console, what are you going to do on launch day? Come hell or high water, you are going to get there. And I had to get there. I had to just leave everything and get there. And I don't have a pointer, but I can tell you, if you look, you can see Apollo 11, Saturn V lifting off. And if you really look where the little green arrow is, I don't know if you can see the little green arrow, that's me. And I know that's me because I was wearing a blue polo shirt. And that's about as close as you can get to a Saturn V launch. That's 3 miles away. So when the launch is successful, what do you do next? You get up and you run back home to Houston to console, right? So now, what happened next? Well, July 20th, 1969 was 4 days away. So I got home, I prepared all of my things, and then that night, the night of July 19th, in Houston, I went to sleep. Now that is an oxymoron. That is a complete joke. You go to the EVA, was going to start something like 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going to try to go to sleep. And of course, I set an alarm clock, and that was silly. You didn't have to do that, and started. So I tossed and turned, and I got up. And when I started getting up, it just felt, that day, that night, felt so different. So I get in my car, and I drive the 2 miles to the Manned Spacecraft Center, now the Johnson Space Center. And what do you do when you get out of your car and Apollo 11 is about to launch, about to land on the moon, and you've parked your car? What are you going to do? You're going to look up in the sky. And I looked up in the sky, and this is what I saw. The moon was waxing. It was 1/4 full, and I knew where the landing site was. It was right by the Terminator, and I looked at it. That was a sea of tranquility. And that was the first round of goosebumps. The second thing that happened is I had been given this badge, and this badge is like no other badge in history. And I put that badge on and walked through security of Mission Control Center wearing this badge. And that made me feel like about as high as I've ever felt in my life. It's an extraordinary feeling. And then I go into Mission Control, and I go to my room, and I go to the console, and I sit down, and you could hear a pin drop. You could absolutely hear a pin drop, and it was very clear that things were not going according to plan. Now, many of you, I'm sure, have seen the video you're about to see. But what I want to call your attention to, this video is about 4 minutes long, and it captures the landing. I want you to listen for 4 terms that are going to be spoken. And those 4 terms, some of them are spoken by Neil, and some of them are spoken at Mission Control. And those 4 terms are 1201 alarm, 1202 alarm, pegged at horizontal velocity, and lastly, everybody quiet, fuel call-outs only, right? So I want you to listen to those as we run through this.
1201. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm. Same time, we'll go, flight. Oh, gotcha. Eagle looking great, your go. Altitude update next, looks good. Roger. Roger, 1202, we copy it.
How you doing, Control?
35 degrees.
Okay, we're go.
We're go, same tide, we're go.
Flight Shadow right on, real
2,000 feet, 2,000 feet, into the ag, 47 degrees. Roger. 47
How's
degrees.
our margin looking, Bob?
It looks okay, we're about 4.5.
Roger.
Eagle looking great, your go.
I think we better be quiet.
We're 400 feet down at 9.
Okay, the only call-outs from now on will be fuel.
Gate forward. 10 and 50 feet down at 4.
B66.
30 half down. Your pegged on horizontal forward. 5%. 185. Okay, 75 feet. Turns looking
About
good,
60.
down a half.
Roger. 60 seconds.
60 seconds. Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. Good. 40 feet down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Break shadow.
Stand by for 30.
4 forward. 4 forward. Drift into the right a little.
30. 30
Down a
seconds.
half. 30 seconds. Forward. Good. Ready? Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
So let me explain this. The computer is being overloaded by data. The 1201 alarm went first inside the lunar module. And there's a guy by the name of Steve Bales. We were all in our 20s, like Jack said yesterday, Jack Schmidt. We're all in our 20s. So Steve Bales is sitting on console, and he knew it was okay to ignore that alarm. He knew it because MIT had built the computer, the flight computer, to not fail and to not lock up and to not freeze and to prioritize what was important. So he said, ignore it. And that's why I say, go flight, continue. And then shortly after that, it happens again. So, but you can imagine being inside the lunar module when these lights are going off. And you can imagine being on console in mission control, hearing all of this, right? Just to give you a sense of what it was like. The next thing that happens is the landing is headed towards a boulder field. And Neil has to grab manual control. And that's when you hear pegged at horizontal velocity. That means he's taking over the flight pattern. He's flying horizontally. He's looking for a safe place to land. It's not going according to script. And he's looking and looking, and of course, while he's looking, he's using up fuel. So the next thing you hear is fuel call-outs only, and you heard it, 60 seconds, 30 seconds. There was probably 10 or 15 seconds of fuel left when Apollo 11 touched down. Now granted, there was an upper stage. They could have aborted. That had never been done. That was risky. And they could have broken away the upper stage from the lower descent stage. So they had the fuel to do that, but nobody wanted to do that, and nobody even dreamed of doing that. So now you have a sense of what it was like in there. It was really pretty amazing. So we took a breather. And then after a while, it's time to come out and walk around. So I'm thinking while all this is going on, let me go. So, while all this is going on, I'm thinking, well, is my little 41-node man going to work? Is this data going to come back? I mean, we going to see something from the spacesuit? So I'm on pins and needles, and here you see the way it worked. Again, I don't have a pointer. I'm sorry, it seemed to fail. But there were 3 positions on my console. There was liquid cool garment, oxygen, and heart rate, EKG. And you could see when the astronauts were walking on the surface, their suit, through a bioharness that they wore, sent all this information about the suit and about them, their physiology and the suit. It sent it to the lunar module. The lunar module sent it across the deep space network to planet Earth, where it ended up in Houston, and it ended up in Building 30. And you can see how the computer program that I wrote and everybody else's computer program digested that data. You see punch cards and UNIVAC 1108s and IBM 360s. You see, this is the way it was to get that information to your console. And I'm looking at it with my buddies and I'm saying, is this going to happen? There's a lot to ask for all this to happen. So what's supposed to happen next? They're supposed to come down the ladder. And Neil goes down the ladder first, and you know what he said. Everybody knows that. And then Buzz comes down the ladder, and the first thing Buzz does is start to test the spacesuit and put it to its extremes. And everybody is really nervous.
You do have to be rather careful to keep track of where your center of mass is. Sometimes it takes about 2 or 3 spaces to make sure that you've got your feet underneath you.
So this was not in the flight plan, by the way. Nobody knew Buzz was going to do this, but he was going to work that spacesuit, and the manufacturers of the spacesuit and everybody using the spacesuit were really nervous. They just wanted him to go out, get some rocks, and come back in. But this is a whole other story. And so we had our second big wave of anticipation. I mean, landing was one thing, and now we've got this to worry about. So I'm sitting there with my friends on console, my 3 buddies on console, looking at the data and saying, well, they're out there, and nothing happened at first. And then all of a sudden, like a miracle, because that's how I consider it to be, it's that impossible thing I was telling you about, all of a sudden, an EKG comes back. That's the first thing. And Buzz's heartbeat comes back, Buzz's EKG comes back, and Neil's EKG came back. And Neil's was kind of faster than Buzz, because Neil said, and I got to know him later in life, he says, I've only got a certain number of heartbeats that I came with. I'm not sure as heck gonna use any of them exercising around if I don't have to. So that was Neil. And that affected by the difference in the 2 heart rate. We also had their breathing rate, but then all this other stuff starts to magically appear. And on the left, you see the way it appeared on console, because I had the presence of mind, I don't know why, to take a photo of it. So you see how the data appeared on console. And then in this one to the right, you see the consumable usage, the metabolic rate activity versus predicted. So you can see the predicted line. I don't know if you can all see the predicted line, but the actual line is above it. And what that means is they're working less hard. I'm sorry, they're working harder than they're working less hard than they're supposed to. So that's good news. They're actually taking it easier, but that was only for one guy, and Buzz's was higher. So we began to get concerned. And then at one point in the mission, and this is actually Jack's data because we didn't have the video, but it happened to Jack Harrison Schmidt also. So I'll show you what happened when they exceeded their limits and we started to really worry. And again, I'll need some volume on this for you to catch it.
Jack. Line. First cable. First cable hook. Watch the cable. Get it? You all right? Yep.
Flight EVA. Good. Still show Jack and Max cooling at an appropriate time. Capcom might remind him.
Okay, the LSD is going out. Okay, copy that.
If it's not, we'll sort of suspect the accident right up to there.
So what you're hearing is a discussion between the Capcom, the flight controllers, us, about he's in the wrong position for cooling. He's using up too much cooling. He needs to change the position of the cooling on the suit, which we were able to see. And that's why we intervened in this particular case to change that.
First cable.
So again, these waves of really high tension came at us in droves, and it's one after another when you're sitting there. And the next one is following 2 hours, 31 minutes, 40 seconds for Apollo 11. The next big step, which in many cases was the biggest, was, are they going to get off the ground? Is all this going to work? So we watched very carefully and held our breath. And we watched them climb in. And again, it was a really nervous kind of thing. And here you see the view out the window, which we captured as they elevate from the surface and head back to rendezvous with the Columbia Command Module. So a big relief, another big relief. And the next big relief after that, how would they re-enter? Would the re-entry go okay? And that was the biggest relief 3 days later, July 24th at 4:50 p.m. UTC, splashdown, thank goodness. And following that, the biggest expression of emotion that I've personally ever seen in mission control and out of mission control. Just an amazing experience to be in that room when this happened. You don't even believe it's real. You're a part of something like this. You just don't believe it's actually happening. So when that finished, they were picked up and they were brought because of worries about moon bugs contaminating planet Earth. They were put inside a quarantine vehicle on the Hornet, and there you see them behind there. And that was my roommate, John Hirosaki. He was assigned to be their chief cook and bottle washer, cook the meals for them and wash their clothes until they got out of quarantine. And here you see the bottom figure there moved to a special building in Houston, Building 37, which is responsible for keeping them under quarantine for about 2 weeks. And a lot of measures went to make sure that happened, and it will be done again with Mars, which is much more of a real threat. We don't know what we're bringing back, but whatever it is, for instance, the air in that building where they all worked and where I worked too was kept at a pressure lower than outside. If anything was going to happen, that air was going to come in, their air was not going to go out. So that's why we kept it like that. So when they finally got out of quarantine, we did it again. We did it 6 times, again and again and again. And there were times we almost ran out of life support. You see some of these things that are highlighted. There were 16 incidents of 10% or less, and 3 incidents of 5% or less life support, and 1 incident of only 2% left by the time they got on the door. But we handled all of it because we had an army of 400,000 people dealing with it, and it never happened. And so years later, I thought it was important to package all this into an algorithm and make it so mission control doesn't have to do, it's part of the suit. The suit becomes smart. And here you see a test that was done years later in 2006 or 7. And you'll see him talking to basically his suit, and his suit is doing everything that we did.
Inlet temperature check. Your LCVG inlet temp is 37 degrees Fahrenheit, and the optimum is 56. You might consider adjusting your cool.
So future suits will actually do this job. They'll have mission control to support them. But as far as me, I mentioned earlier that this was kind of an amazing set of circumstances, and each one seemed to lead to another in my life. And so in the top left, I did a PhD thesis at Berkeley on 41-node man. I basically took it, and they said, wow, you can do that for a PhD. And I said, amazing. And the next thing that happened is I ended up helping build a space shuttle. And then because I was helping build a space shuttle and we needed spokespersons, this kind of happened. I'll just play this real quick because it's fun.
You're involved with these times. Would you be comfortable leaving, say, next week on this? Be honest now. Now, I want an honest, Doc, give me an honest appraisal. Would you feel comfortable knowing that these things, you've had a problem with them, and I know they're supposed to be fixed now. But if they come off, if even 1 or 2 come off,
They're not coming off.
there's going to be a problem, right? Did you use Elmer's glue on these like you're involved with these?
So you get the picture. These kinds of things, one breeds another, breeds another. And the last one that I'm working on now is building a spacesuit for Mars. And I'll see if I can get this to play for brief. I know I'm running close to the edge here. We're almost done. And my students at Berkeley, and for some time I've been working on a spacesuit for Mars, which is a very different kind of animal than any other spacesuit that we've ever built. And it's a lot of fun. So there's always something else you can get involved in if you dream. And that's where it all starts. So you heard what my dream is, and now it's time for you to talk and think about yours. And let's go back to the first slide. Dream high, let your reach exceed your grasp. The most important thing that all of you have to embrace is this word failure has a bad name. And failure is actually amazingly good. You want to fail because it's how we learn. You don't want to fail the same way twice. You don't want to repeat the same exact mistakes. But every time you fail, you're going to learn, and you will not do that again. So the 4 P's stand for passion, priority, persistence, and pudding. So this is how you do this roadmap. Take a blank piece of paper and put in 5 or 6 things that you're most passionate about. If you can put 10, great. If you can put 3, great. Just list them. This is what I'm really passionate about. It should come right to you. And the second thing is prioritize them. What that means is order them in such a way that the first one is the one you think you can do the easiest, that you love, and the last one is a thing that you might have the most problem with. So for instance, if your passion is running a mile in 2 minutes, you better be a quarter horse, because you're not going to do it. So you have to really think about how to order these. The third one is persistence, and what that means is don't be afraid if somebody tells you you can't do it. Don't be afraid if you don't get accepted the first time. I failed my driver's license test 4 times. I failed my PhD orals 3 times. I can't begin to list all the failures that I've had in my life, and every one of them has to be embraced, and they build character, and you'll do better the next time. In mathematics, it's called predictor-corrector. You aim for a target, you don't hit it, and you see how far off, and then you correct, and then you predict again. And one last thing I want to say, and it's this thing about luck. I talked about luck a lot. So Gene Kranz has an expression that luck is what happens when persistence meets opportunity, right? Well, I have a corollary to that. The last P is putting, and that means putting yourself out there where the right place meets the right time. The key is putting yourself out there. If you do that, it's called good luck. And if you don't do that, it's called bad luck. But the key is you must be unafraid to put yourself out there, no matter how uncomfortable it feels. And lastly, it's so important to be part of a team. If you can do all of this and be part of a team, fantastic, really fantastic. So Neil, as he was climbing up the ladder on Saturn V, he kept a notation of what he wanted to say, and he wrote that down. And that is, all was ready, everything had been done, the time had come. We knew that hundreds of thousands had done their best to give us this chance. Now it was time for us to do our best for them. Being part of a team is an extraordinary thing in life. And I think I got it here. Questions. I think I have some time for questions. Thank you.